Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nazariana Wamahdynie. In this video, I would like to present to you my thesis with the title Translation Techniques of Cultural Words Applied in the Novel The Hunger Games by Suzanne into Indonesia. Alright, without further ado, let's begin. So the first one is background of the study. Nowadays, people have been growing too fond of young adult science fiction and fantasy novels after this genre became a hit in several Hollywood film industries. Many popular and well-written novels have been published from foreign countries. However, not all Indonesian people can understand the content since these novels are written in English. These novels cannot just randomly translate it because it can confuse the reader. A good, a good translator must be followed several techniques. Thus, the purpose and the message from the source language doesn't change. By the existence of translation, people will be helped to understand better the ideas, knowledge, and contents of the novel. I chose this title for my study because translation is one of the subjects that are taught in English language education study program, and it might be useful for students of ELESP and other researchers to enrich their knowledge in translation techniques, especially according this study, is to translate cultural words from English to Indonesian. In this study, I choose The Hunger Game, written by Suzanne as the research object because this novel considered as one of the most popular young adult novels ever released. It released at 2008 and has sold more than 100 million of copies. This novel has been translated into more than 50 languages and publishing rights have been sold in 38 regions. The Indonesian version of this book have the same title, The Hunger Games, and have been translated by Hayes Firstly. Next is statement of the problem. Based on the background of the study, I decided to analyze the translation techniques used by Hayes Firstly in translating cultural words in the Hunger Games novel into Indonesian. And for the objective of the study is to find out the translation techniques that are used by Hattersley in translating cultural words in the novel The Hunger Games into Indonesian. Next is the significances of the study. The first one is theoretical significances. So to provide additional input and become reference in teaching translation, especially in translating cultural words from English into Indonesian. And the second one is practical significances. The first one to lecturer and teacher. This study will become reference and information. Therefore, it can help the lecturers and teachers to teach literary or linguistics material, especially in teaching translation. And then for the students, this study can be beneficial as one of the literature review to improve students' knowledge, especially to help students in studying linguistics, and will provide more information about techniques of translation that used in translating cultural words from English into Indonesian. And the last is for the researcher. This study will become reference and guidance for the other researcher to conduct the same research with an eye that it becomes a helpful and useful guidance. And the next, I will introduce the definitions of the key terms. The first one is translation. Translation is process of rendering the source language, or SL, into the target language, or TL, without changing the purposes and the message of the context. And next is translation techniques. Translation techniques is the procedure to analyze and classify the way of translation equivalence works. Translation techniques is called as the realizations of the decision or making process where the product of translation can be identified on the translation result. And the next is cultural words. Cultural words or cultural expressions are words and phrases conditioned by the cultural diversity which often occurs in Indonesia. And the next is The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is a novel written by Suzanne Collins and published in 2008. This novel became the subject to analyze in this research. And the next is SL or source language. That is a language which is used in the original novel. And the last is TL, stands for target language. That is the language which source language is translated. On the next chapter is a review of related literature. This chapter will discuss about the nature of translation, techniques of translation, process of translation, translation and culture, cultural categories, translation techniques in literature towards English language teaching and learning, and previous study related to this topic. And the next chapter is methods of research. In this study, I use the descriptive qualitative research. The purpose of this method is to make systematic and accurate descriptions about the facts and relationship in the data that is analyzed, while qualitative research maintains the value. I only gathered and classified the data and then drew conclusion without making generalization. In this research, the data were collected from English and Indonesian version of the Hunger Games novel. The research cultural words found in the Hunger Games novel from its English version into Indonesian version. I also considered to take necessary data from the novel and analyze it to fulfill the whole criteria of translation techniques based on the Molina and Albier. And I focus on cultural words as the necessary data to be analyzed because language and cultural is connected. And the next chapter is research findings and discussion. In this chapter, I include research findings and discussion, of course. Research finding will present about the result found in the study in general. Meanwhile, the discussion presents detailed data without each. The discussions presents detailed data about each phenomenon found in the analysis of the data. The research, I, as the researcher, will discuss about 12 out of 18 translation techniques by Molina and Albier in translating cultural words that were found in the novel and describe the data. And these are amplification, borrowing, calque, description, discursive creation, established equivalence, generalization, linguistic amplification, linguistic compression, literal translation, particularizations, and the last is reduction. And I will also mention cultural categories which found in the novel as the following: ecology, material culture, social culture, organization, custom, activities, procedures, ideas, and the last is gestures. And the last is conclusion and suggestion. The conclusion that can be drawn related to the objective of the study is the translator used 12 techniques out of 18 translation techniques by Molina and Albir in translating cultural words that were found in the novel. The most used translator techniques applied by the translator is called techniques, which is the technique of translation used in translating a word or phrase singly from source language into target language. And that's all from me. Thank you very much, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.